Well, hello, America. This is Brandon from AmericasCitizenPress.com, and today is Wednesday, March 31st, 2021. I'm here to bring you some news stories that you might have missed. As you know, the corporate news media in this country is nothing but a propaganda wing for the Democratic left. And here at America's Citizen Press, we are trying to bring you some news stories that shed light on what's going on in our country, particularly around issues that the media does not want to talk about. So let's dig in and see what's going on in our country today. First off, I want to talk about some of the Second Amendment restrictions that we're facing. This unprecedented attack on our right to keep and bear arms should be shocking and completely outrageous to any true American. After that, I want to talk a little bit about the COVID madness that has been plaguing our country for over a year with some of the latest headlines. Then the anti-marriage Biden tax scheme will completely and utterly disgust you if you are a married couple that makes a good amount of money. After that, we'll finish off by talking about some of the breakdown at our southern border, and just the stuff that's happening is just completely and utterly outrageous, and taxpayer dollars are being used in ways that should shock and frustrate every American taxpayer. Well, let's get started with talking about Second Amendment. One of the big issues facing our country right now is this a complete and utter assault by the federal government on the states. The federal government is attempting to use their power to force state governments to go along with their anti-freedom schemes. Well, fortunately, we're seeing some states fight back. One of these states is in Arizona. Arizona lawmakers are sending a firearm freedom bill to Governor Doug Ducey's desk. Now, this is a great thing. This is exactly what we need to see. We need to see nullification, and we need to see local governments standing up for the rights of their citizens. So just on Monday, that would be Monday this week, Arizona Senate passed legislation to prohibit in-state enforcement of federal gun control laws which violate the Second Amendment. Now, this is clearly a preemptive defensive maneuver to stop the Biden administration's unconstitutional gun grabs. As we'll get into later, it's pretty scary what they're trying to do. So pretty amazing that we're seeing strengthening of the Second Amendment through this local legislation, and very encouraging. So be hopeful, people. Be hopeful, fellow Americans and gun lovers out there. There are ways that we can try to fight to preserve our Second Amendment rights. Moving on from the Arizona story, I want to bring another story that is amazing as well, and that is Tennessee. Tennessee is passing constitutional carry, and we're hoping the governor signs it. One of the amazing things that constitutional carry does is allow law-abiding gun owners to carry their firearm on their person, open or concealed. After all, if you're able to legally own a gun, shouldn't you be able to carry it? The whole point of having a gun is being able to defend yourself and defend your family. At least one of the major points that I care about. As we've seen these horrific attacks by cowardly criminals assaulting and murdering innocent Americans, the only thing that's going to stop them is when the potential victims start shooting back. After all, why do you call the police if there's a violent criminal? Why would you call the police if there's a violent criminal? Because they have a gun. Because the police and law enforcement officers have guns and they can fire back on this criminals or terrorists. By giving law-abiding Americans easier access to carry their firearms in public, we are going to prevent any more massacres. At least that's the hope. So Tennessee has passed constitutional carry. This is something that we need to see happen all across the country. So as it says in the article, 18 states currently allow law-abiding citizens to carry a gun for self-defense. That's Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, Idaho, Kansas, Kentucky, Maine, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, New Hampshire, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Utah, Vermont, West Virginia, and Wyoming. So that's great. Let's hope this list continues to grow, and if you're an activist working for the Second Amendment, this is your time to shine. Moving on from some of the positive gun stories, I want to talk a little bit about how the media on the left spins the gun control narrative. Every time our country has seen a tragedy in which somebody is harmed or killed by a firearm, we often see the news media jump to conclusions and immediately presume that gun control, restricting the ability of law-abiding gun owners, would somehow solve the problem and prevent victims. This is a complete and utter fabrication of the anti-gun authoritarian establishment in our country. As we've seen here, here in Colorado, where I'm from, a very unfortunate event happened in Boulder, a complete and utter tragedy, and a police officer was one of the victims in Boulder, Colorado, at the King Soopers grocery store tragedy. Now, something the news media is not reporting highly on is that he was a gun rights activist. According to his father, this Officer Eric Talley had a AR-15 rifle. He was an avid shooter and supported the right to keep and bear arms. However, you'll see the left, the Democrats in particular, use what happened to him and other innocent victims to promote their ridiculous, horrendous, and sickening agenda to disarm law-abiding Americans. As we've seen there, less than 24 hours after this horrific tragedy in Boulder, we saw Joe Biden, Barack Obama, and all their little cronies in the Democratic establishment come out and call for assault weapon bans, quote unquote, and universal gun registration. Absolutely and utterly sickening to see how fast they politicized this tragedy. So one of the reasons why what's going on in Tennessee and Arizona in particular, as well as other Second Amendment sanctuaries across our country, is so important is because we're seeing attempts by the president to override Congress basically and push through gun control outside of the scope of the legislative branch. Now, the executive branch has no right to do this, not only to pass laws, but to infringe on our constitutionally protected rights. So this is an utter insult to all the Americans who fought for our freedom over the years and all of us who believe in America as freedom and still do. So as we're seeing here, Biden could be going after ghost guns with the executive order, which is basically the ability for anybody to fabricate their own firearm. There's no way you can stop that from happening. The technology is already out of the bag, but they want to penalize people for doing so, is what it seems. Another executive order that we might be seeing come down the pike is a ban on the importation of certain semi-automatic rifles and firearm magazines. We've seen congressmen, over 60 of them, sign a letter begging Joe Biden to pass executive order banning the importation of certain guns. They don't even call for what guns are that should be banned in the letter. They just ask Biden to restrict guns coming into our country. Complete and utter lunacy and an insult to the American people. So very, very frightening. We will keep you updated on this at America Citizen Press. Moving on to the COVID madness, something that was very shocking to me. However, I guess nothing should shock us anymore after a year of seeing our rights violated, is a church. Yes, a church. After we've seen churches be attacked by radical Democrats to shut them down, we actually see a church that has divided their parishioners into a not yet vaccinated section and a fully vaccinated section. I mean, this is absolutely and utterly insulting to people who are of faith in general, but also a complete and utter propaganda to segregate people into two camps and give special privilege to those who've taken the government's medicine. Absolutely and utterly shocking. Disgusting, actually. Moving on to some other COVID madness that's going on. So the COVID crisis, many of us would agree, was overblown and completely and utterly unprecedented in its assault on our rights as free human beings. And we remember, if you remember, about a year ago when this whole thing first started, the talk was all about ventilators. We need more ventilators, and when are the ventilators coming in? And the ventilators are going to do all of this. Well, you know, this is just illustrative of how central planning always fails. Government politicians, bureaucrats, and government employees think they have some sort of magic formula to how resources should be divided, how things should be purchased, how costs should be distributed across the market, but they're always and utterly wrong. And one hope you should always have for the future is the failure of central planning. Socialism and communism fails, as we've seen in Canada, where they spent more than $700 million on useless ventilators. Unbelievable. They say only about 500 ventilators were ever used out of the 40,000 ventilators that were ordered. So completely and utterly over the top, seeing what has happened, millions and millions of dollars wasted, our rights restricted, and for 500 ventilators out of 40,000 to be used. If you need any more type of proof that the whole COVID scare was overblown, It's articles like this. These are facts, people. 40,000 ventilators never used was not what the government said it would be. Moving on. Another COVID story that I think is of extreme importance is understanding who was affected by the COVID virus. It wasn't just elderly people. However, they were the vast majority of people who died, and the vast majority of people who were hospitalized were people in their elder years. However, it was about 78% of the people who were hospitalized were overweight or obese. Now, this is CNBC, so a very mainstream article. However, all the conversations we're seeing by these Democratic governors and authoritarians in local, state, and federal government do not revolve around health. They don't revolve around health. They revolve around restricting our rights and restricting our freedom. As we've seen, most people who were affected were elderly or they were overweight. And that's the simple fact of the matter. This news story, this needs to be a bigger covered idea or bigger covered story about what happened during this last year, is understanding, to really recap and understand what happened to our country, to our communities, to our own lives. We need to understand who was actually affected by this, who we were told was going to be affected by this. What did they tell us was going to happen, what actually happened, and what was the actual outcome of all of this. And that kind of picture paints a very frightening idea of how incompetent and evil the government is. Moving on from there. This is something that is hopeful and very optimistic, and you should be very positive about this. And this just came out today that a Wisconsin Supreme Court judge strike down the Democrat governor's mask mandate. That is absolutely wonderful. Let's hope that continues across the country. Now, the Gateway Pundit here, the article does say that the conservative-leaning Washington Supreme Court, it was a very close call, 4-3 ruling. So judges do matter. And they say that Evers, the Democrat governor of Wisconsin, violated the law by issuing multiple emergency orders and circumventing the state legislature. Now, it should be obvious to anybody who understands what representative government is supposed to be, where the state legislature is the one who decides what the laws are, and the executive branch is only to enforce those laws. It's not to make up laws of their own. However, we've seen a complete abuse of power by Democratic governors across our country over the last year. So the courts, in many respects, are considered the last hope of America, and thankfully in Wisconsin, we are proven right. Now, moving on to the anti-marriage Biden tax plan. Now, this is completely and utterly ridiculous, and maybe it's an underhanded attack on marriage itself in a traditional American family, or maybe it's just pure incompetence. Either one, neither of those would surprise me, and I don't think anybody would be surprised by either of those. So Biden is unveiling the largest tax increase in recent history, completely and utterly destructive to our economy, and especially coming out of this whole COVID lockdown crisis. Well, so what the marriage penalty would do is basically, if you earned too much money and filed joint taxes, you would be penalized more than if you filed individually, right? So basically, they say the threshold would be $400,000, which used to be a lot of money and is not as much money as it used to be, that's for sure. So, if you make under $400,000, hey, maybe you're not affected by all of the tax hikes, although, of course, you will be affected by some of them. But if you're a couple that files jointly and your combined income, cumulative income, is $400,000 or more, then you would be penalized. So what this means is those married couple that are high income earners, if they filed individually, would not have the same kind of tax burden that they would if they were filed jointly as married couple. Now, this is completely and utterly ridiculous, and it shouldn't be that surprising because we've seen so many welfare schemes and government tax schemes that basically penalize people who have a traditional family and instead go after people, give money and handouts to people who are single and have many kids. So it's an extreme disadvantage to married couples, and extremely frightening to see government policy come out against traditional families and marriage itself. So that's an important issue. The tax increases are all bad, but this is exclusively bad for married couples as well. Now, going on to the breakdown at the border, it's a continuous crisis, a humanitarian crisis, something that's been going on for a while now, and it seems like it's only getting worse. But one of the things that makes me the most concerned is seeing our American tax dollars, my hard-earned tax money, being spent to help house, educate, and provide services for people who are not paying taxes. That's the simple fact of it. Regardless of what you think about immigration, the idea that tax money, which is basically just a wealth redistribution scheme, taking from wage earners to give to consumers basically who do not earn wages at the time, is very, very wrong, both morally, ethically, and economically. It just doesn't make sense. So this PJ Media article here, feds began hiring $144,000 per year babysitters for urgent job watching kids illegally sent over the US border. So that's right. The Biden administration, through the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, put out a call on March 25th, so a week ago, for heads of departments and supervisors to find current and former federal employees to be reassigned temporarily to watch kids at illegal alien holding facilities. So this is a job announcement to hire people to watch children to the tunes of 6 figures a year. I mean, expensive babysitters, basically, is the way the article sums it up. Just another use of our tax dollars that is completely unnecessary and wrong. Moving on to San Diego. Now, this should upset you, especially if you're a parent, if you've had to keep your child out of public school and keep them at home where they're not able to get the kind of instruction they would otherwise. This is San Diego public school teachers to give migrant kids in-person instruction before their own students. So students, the normal students who've been there this whole time, are learning online only. However, the migrant children are being able to be taught in person. Now, it's pretty interesting to see this happening where, let's quote the article. We have 130,000 kids who haven't been allowed in a classroom for over a year in the San Diego Unified School District. Now, the person says it's great that there's in-person learning for those unaccompanied minors from Central America, but I wish every child in San Diego was allowed the same opportunity. This is a San Diego County supervisor. So if you think the system isn't broken, an article like this will definitely show that this system is broken. I mean, to see U.S. tax dollars or any tax dollars go to these types of programs is just a complete and utter slap into the face for the people who've been paying their whole lives. Now, the last story I'd like to talk today is from my home state of Colorado, where they're actually going to use state housing assistance. So that's tax money. Tax dollars from Colorado taxpayers are going to be used if the governor signs this into law, because it has passed the state legislature, that provides state housing assistance to those who are here unlawfully. So what that means is that there will be no requirement for people to show paperwork to confirm they're legally in the U.S. to sign up for state housing equipment. So of course the Democrats in Colorado are celebrating this as a great justice that, people who just move here and aren't part of the system and haven't paid any taxes are going to be able to basically get state housing assistance, taxpayer funded housing assistance. I mean, just completely and utterly ridiculous and a slap in the face to all of us people in Colorado who pay our taxes and don't use any of these government programs. Aren't the government programs there for us taxpayers to use if we need them? Guess not. Guess not in a Democrat-controlled state like Colorado. Well, friends, it's been a lot of fun. I hope you didn't get too upset. I hope I gave you some reason for optimism as well. But check out americascitizenpress.com daily, americascitizenpress.com, for articles, headlines, more videos like this, and other interesting information that the mainstream media isn't telling you about. So goodbye, friends. Take care, and we'll see you next time.